Hello, everybody. Welcome to the IC Topic Chats. For today, July 20th, 2023, we are with Ayanna Vasquez today of Kez Consulting, K's Consulting. I want to say it correctly. And she's talking about peer brainstorming on RFPs. Welcome, Ayanna.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you for having me.
And so, Ayanna, I read your bio on LinkedIn. You are probably a little bit different than most of the folks in the room. We often have PhDs and master's students and lawyers, but we rarely have a medical doctor. So tell me a little bit about that. And tell me a little bit about who you are before we jump into the topic on pure brainstorming on RFPs.
Yeah, I do have an unusual journey. I definitely started focusing on medicine. I actually did a couple of years of internal medicine, but then I kind of got burnt out and was focusing a bit more on public health and public health initiatives. So in that world, I learned about evaluation when it comes to accountability for our program, and was able to work on a lot of governmental evaluation projects for hypertension, and then for when COVID came around for COVID, and then kind of transitioning into that world and of evaluation formally through my KES consulting group company. So I do that, currently doing it part-time. So it's still, we're celebrating a year this August of being active, but I am definitely learning a lot, and I love the getting involved with community organizations and supporting them. So that's kind of my angle towards it.
So Ayanna, just to make sure I'm saying your consulting group's name correct, it's KES. Is that right? Okay, just want to make sure I've got that right. And I got a note from somebody privately that there's a little bit of an echo, and that's probably because we were having some audio issues at the beginning. And so Ayanna did call in, and so she's using her phone, but you'll see her on her computer. But so I think that's a little bit of it. It doesn't sound bad at all to me, but I can tell there's a little bit of a different sound, but it's not at all, to me, it's not disturbing. It's just different than what we would normally hear. So if it is a problem, please let me know, and we'll see if we need to make an edit or make any changes to that. But I mean, honestly, you sound fine on my end, but I can tell it is different from normal. So the topic is pure brainstorming on RFPs. Please, go ahead and kick things off. Feel free to share slides if you have any, and I'd be happy to support you in any way.
A little summary as to how this came about. If Matt can remember, I actually emailed and reached out to him asking, "Do you have any advice on RFPs?" And he was like, "That's a great idea. You should do a webinar." I was like, I don't think that was my question. But I decided to pick up the ball and run with it, which I think was informative. And it turns out, there's a lot about doing RFPs that just kind of run the gamut of writing grants. A lot of the principles are the same, applying to a lot of fellowships, so a lot of us who have who've gotten our PhDs, who are postdocs, a lot of the steps are familiar, should be familiar to you. But I will also add that this is a peer brainstorming or a mastermind session. So really looking to hear from you as to what your experiences have been. A lot of you have more time in evaluation than I have. So whether you want to jump in the conversation or wait towards the end, I think the format is probably wait towards the end, so we can definitely discuss what I've presented. All right, so I'm breaking this up into the way this was framed was the approach, the response, and the win, right? So the approach being, is this even for me? So you have a RFP in your hand and you are struggling as to whether or not this is something that you want to go for. And some of the questions you may want to ask yourself is like, basic, of course, is what's the RFP about? And is this something that's interesting to you? Is it a topic that you've already done an RFP on or have some experience in. The only little caveat I would put in to thinking about this is also it's more than just the money, right? It's more than just the opportunity. I know we have businesses to run, but sometimes running after RFP that will financially support your business might not be something that the reviewers on the other end will see you as a best fit for. So you do want to consider, is this a great way to create personal connections? Is it a great way for networking opportunities? Is it a great way to develop a skill? That might be your personal interest. And having some sort of personal interest within accepting an RFP is going to show through to a proposal. So the reviewer is going to see your passion, is going to see your interest, going to see your commitment when you have some sort of skin in the game. I will also add this at the beginning that despite the fact of being in evaluation for a short period of time, I have been a grant reviewer and an RFP reviewer longer than I've been an evaluator. And that's just, I've just been pulled in from different organizations because because of my health expertise to review a lot of proposals. So I do have that kind of vision of what's on the other side. So the expertise for this proposal, we just talked about if there is a gap between what you have to offer and what the RFP is looking for. The next question is, are you ready to put some investment into narrowing that gap in time for the RFP? And that's just something that you have to consider as far as your resources, your team's resources. If there's somebody you need to bring on to add to your team, or even if it's for a short venture, even just to add credibility to your proposal. Experience is also something that you want to consider. Can't tell you how many times I have been in committees looking at RFPs, and the question always comes up, where's the evidence? Like, where in your resume, where is your portfolio or your team's work history can we make a direct connection? Because the question that I was just speaking with a colleague who's reviewing grants right now, and his question is this even believable, right? What you're proposing based on what we can see from your experience are you proposing something that we can believe in? So the next thing, so we talked about the what, and then it's the where. And I know in this age of teleworking, that might be a smaller concern where there's a lot of remotes, hybrid positions. But for a lot of organizations, especially smaller organizations, this is something to consider. If they're providing funding, sometimes they want to make sure that they're providing funding to local organizations. So you may want to research who are the past winners, who are the past grantees, if you're talking about grants, for a particular organization. If they're focusing on a very specific community, then this is something that you may want to, it might eliminate you immediately, and they might not consider your proposal. Also, location is important for access. So during the process of the RFP is not just writing the paper, there's a lot of background work that you have to consider. And we want to make sure we're in the vicinity of the organization in order to gain access. So if they're great with emails, if they're great with phone calls, awesome. Some organizations like the personal touch still. So you may want to consider that in accepting an RFP or starting to write one. The other thing is credibility. I mean, if you're already working in the area where RFP is originating from, if you're already working with the communities, you're already working with the populations, that just adds to your credibility and adds to the, are you believable? Is your proposal believable? Next thing would be the who and the why. So is this an organization that you want to work with, right? Is it an organization that wants to work with you? Researching their researching their goals, their purpose, their missions, is something that you're going to want to do. And this is simply Googling, right? This is simply doing LinkedIn. This is simply looking to see what content that they have online. They might have published materials. Social media is now a big thing, kind of what they've put out. So if you're not too active on social media, this might be a good time to get engaged. And then there's, of course, multiple platforms now with this new Threads platform. It's just multiplying. So you just want to have good coverage when understanding what the organization is putting out. And also, if you have a previous experience with the organization, you may just know, like, there's some personalities there, there's some politics there that's just not gonna jive with what your ethos is. Who is actually funding the RFP or the organization? So the RFP or organization might actually have ties to another or larger organization. And so you want to do some research on them, whether or not their ethos and their mission is something that makes sense to you and something you can incorporate into your proposal. All these are like added tidbits that just makes you more credible in the proposal and gives the reviewer understanding that, yes, this person understands the mission. So we talked about kind of superficial research on these organizations, but the next step to that is relationship building, right? So you've done the internet scouring. Now the next thing is reaching out. And this is even before writing the proposal. We talked about previous grantees or previous proposal winners, reaching out to them, previous consultants, colleagues or organizations that might be in their ecosystem that might be relevant. These are important people to reach out to, especially if you have a connection, because they might provide an introduction that you might need to get your foot in the door when you otherwise might not have. And also, don't downplay, we talked about social media, don't downplay social media connections. So is not only about seeing what they're putting out, but taking a little extra time to respond to, comment on, maybe not like, they might not see the likes, but providing some relevant, interesting comment on what they're putting out. So it allows them to see you. Yes, it might just be their social media person, but it still allows them to see you. They might tap that social media person to review the proposal if it's a small organization. So it might be helpful to comment on a social media post that is relevant and that is not too controversial. Of course, there is a beware sign here, because yes, you're seeing them, but they are also seeing you. So they're seeing your social media content, and that even though you're just doing an organizational social media platform, you might be responding with, if your organizational platform is connected to your personal one, a good social media savvy person might be able to make these connections and kind of know who you are even before you submit your proposal. So you are reaching out to people who are board members of the organization, connected with the organization in some way, and you're going to have probably the conversation, right? This conversation could be through email, phone, we discuss social media, could be in person. Don't just chat for chatting's sake. Yes, a little small talk is great, but you want to make sure that you're gaining something, right? So you're asking questions, but you're also listening. So the questions to bear in mind is really kind of confirming what your research has already told you about the organization, confirming understanding their mission, their purpose, their goals, their objectives, their current plans, as well as their future plans. And also making sure that you're stating that they are who you are so that they are aware of you. So you want to make sure that they are aware of your mission, your goals, your successes, your competency. You want to be able to have some sort of expertise that's conveyed. And if there's the opportunity to minimize some concerns they might have. So we're all in a lot of us are in boutique consulting. I think the one downfall we kind of always have is we're small and we're not a large consulting, and whether or not we can take on a proposal. So if this might be a great opportunity to minimize that concern by over-indexing on your strengths. But then listening is equally important. So you're listening for terms, you're listening for language, you're listening for ideas, you're listening for theories that are important to them. We're going to refer to this later on in the webinar, but basically these are things that are important, and it's helping you kind of socialize yourself in some ways to their world and their ecosystem. And if there's people who they find to be important thought leaders or mentors for their organization, these are people you kind of want to at least read up on or do a little research on. Listening also allows you to understand who their ideal candidate is, and also who their ideal candidate is not. So if you're getting a sense that they're hinting in some way verbally that you might not be a good fit for them, don't take it as an insult in any way. Just understand where they are and what they're looking for, and use that and leverage that to some future project. If you're doing in-person interviews or in-person informational interviews, non-verbal cues are also very important to understanding kind of where you are, where you fit in their landscape when they're looking at proposals. So now we're coming up to kind of the when aspect of timeline. So we're probably all familiar with looking at proposals. A really well thought out RFP has a timeline that the organization wants things sent in by, and you don't really have to do too much there. But I kind of want to focus a bit more on your timeline, right? So what we talked about a lot was research, relationship building. That all takes time. So you may want to think of, do I have enough time before submitting this RFP to build a relationship with this organization or to understand the initiative a little bit better? And that can be anything from if there's a signature event or annual events that an organization does, you may want to kind of just show your face there. If there are webinars that they do that you think will just kind of help you understand what's their initiative, you may want to attend those. So kind of understanding, the time from when you see the RFP to when it's submitted, is there time to start making connection? And then is there time for them to be familiar with your work? So if you have near completion projects that are coming out, if you're having some media exposure that's coming out, you may want to kind of time your proposal submission with things that your team or you are putting out there. And this is all what they call earned media. So that a reviewer says, oh yes, I've heard about them. Oh yes, I saw them here. So you don't have this kind of fresh look when you come across their desk. There's already a connection. If there's something that you're putting out, and they can make that connection, and you're not just kind of dismissed as small or not having the capacity to do what was asked for in the proposal. Also, just small things, if you need to build up your credibility as far as finishing a degree or learning a new skill, things that can be evidence for your proposal, you may want to consider time for that. A lot of proposals ask for letters of support from other organizations. If you just started working for an organization that a month ago, you might not have a really robust letter of support, and that might show through in the proposal. So your timeline is equally as important as their timeline. Capacity, I feel like as evaluators, you probably already know this, strengthening your capacity, the how of this. Do you even have time for it? Do you even have the resources of the people? So I won't delve too much into that. So now this is the interesting part of the response. So I will not give you, the 10 best ways for the winning proposal. Sorry. But I will give you general guidelines that no matter what the topic or the content is, most reviewers kind of say the same thing. And that is, I'll start with the first one, clarity, 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 right? So grammar, English language, typos, won't say too much there, but also jargon. I'm gonna asterisk that a little bit. We're gonna come back to that. Is also important. Some reviewers prefer active voice, present tense. It comes across a bit more assertive than passive voice, unless needed. So maybe in the background section, it might be a bit more appropriate to your past tense, but present tense is going to be definitely useful for moving forward in the writing of the proposal. And then being compliant. So there are guidelines in the proposals, and they're not just guidelines like suggestions, they're things that you need to adhere to, because what is laid out in the proposal as recommended, suggested, or guidelines is what gets converted into a scoring card for the reviewer, and the reviewer is going to look at that and judge your proposal based on all of those criteria. It's really kind of not anything extra for reviewer. They're giving a scoring sheet. They're saying score of 1 to 5, and they're just comparing and contrasting and seeing if you can provide evidence of what they're asking for. And then the last thing is being concise. I was just reading an article that the human attention span doesn't seem to be shorter than 7 to 10 minutes. So some say longer, like 20, some say even shorter, like 8 seconds. The idea is, if they, especially if they give you a requirement of how many pages, stick to that, but be as concise as possible. So your authentic voice. We live in a world in which a lot of us do it. We are professional grant writers for other people. And unfortunately, the reviewers are also professional grant writers for other people. So we, as professional grant writers, we understand things that we use to try to get a proposal across or to get funding. And as much as possible, even if you're using professional grant writer, you want to add your authentic voice. You've already done the background work of building connection, like we talked before, of reaching out. So when you're writing it, like infuse your proposal with that. Don't call people's names, of course, but the terms, the language, the ideas, the associations, any theories, depending on what your RFP is about, that was referenced before when you were having the conversation portion of it, like find ways to infuse that into your proposal, but do it in an authentic way, right? This is not copy and paste. This is more of like, I understand the universe in which you guys are living in and what's important to you. And then don't over promise. Grant reviewers, RFP reviewers, they do their research like everybody else. So they will Google you, they will link in you, they will reach out to your colleagues. As much as information you're doing on them, they're doing on you. So if you are promising something that somebody cannot support, even if you have a letter to support, this goes to the believability part, the credibility part. So can they believe you? It would be great that what you are representing in the real world equals to what is seen in the proposal. And so now we're going to the win. And you're looking for something that, how do you actually win a proposal? And again, this is a human connection. You're dealing with a human person. And like any Hollywood movie understands, you're looking for that unique story, right? So whether the unique story about you, unique story about your consulting group, you want that presented and presented concisely, and presented in a interesting way that's relevant to you, that's authentic to your voice. Also, are you meeting the needs of the organization within your proposal? So you need really to be specific about how you're meeting the needs, in what ways you're meeting the needs, because this is also goes to the believability of the proposal. Does it even make sense what you're suggesting to meet the needs? Considering using very specific language, I will meet the needs as that, like kind of lead them to the trough, in this situation. If there's some concerns that you maybe picked up along the way, be very specific and logical about addressing these concerns. Also, meeting the moment. Sometimes you're great for the organization and for the topic, but maybe not for the moment. And that's just something you're going to have to sense out through your background and your researching. Maybe there is something about your lived experience that can speak to this moment, and that will kind of elevate your proposal more than others. So understanding the timeline of the organization, the timeline in which or the atmosphere in which the organization is actually working in, and making sure you address that you can meet not only their needs, but their needs at this time. So tying to outcomes, expectations, making sure that's very specific, logical, and making sure there's compelling evidence to support this. And then when you're writing, always consider partners to review your work. And the question is always, can my fourth grader understand the proposal I wrote, right? So this goes back to the clarity, this goes back to conciseness. Even if you may have to dig a little into some theory depending on the proposal, do you understand that if a committee or organization is small, yes, there might be like 3 main people on the board you can read, but at some point in time, they might pass it to a secretary and say, we need extra hands, can you read this? And if the secretary can't read it or administrative assistant can't read it, then that's just not helping you with your scores. So you've submitted your proposal. Congratulations. Now what to do? You sit on your hands? No. Following up is also important. If you want to stay genuine, stay authentic, then if you showed up to their signature event or their annual event or their webinars before the proposal, you kind of need to follow through, right? You need to keep showing up. And this is important, whatever happens with the outcome of the RFP. You want to keep showing up, keep being active, follow the tips that we discussed about timeline, about building relationships, and just kind of continue to do that. And if there's any outreach from the organization or the initiative about concerns, just respond to those quickly and promptly, because a lot of time they're on deadlines and they can't always wait around for your response. Sometimes we have, because we really, really want you to get this RFP, but there's always a limit, okay? And then for those of us who are just starting out, the good news about winning is that you can also fake it till you make it, right? So the idea is practice, practice, practice. You might not get it on the first go, and I'm sure a lot of people might be able to talk about their history and their journey to gaining RFPs, and it probably wasn't the first one, it probably wasn't the second one. It took a little while to gain and to win an RFP, but it was all through practice, practice, practice. And then also don't lose touch. So this kind of the following up part. So they've sent you a letter or they haven't sent you a letter, and you just kind of gotten the hint that you aren't the one that they want. but that doesn't mean that there aren't other opportunities in the future, and that there isn't a second go around. So don't lose touch with the organization, continue the networking and the researching that you've already done, and just prepare for the next round. There's only a limited number of spots, and it doesn't mean that you aren't ideal for the organization. It just means probably at this moment you're not ideal. So that's kind of what I have. You have like 20 more minutes if Matt wants to open it
No, I
up.
think it was good. I have a couple questions for you before we open it completely up. So, Ayanna, one of the things that we do is we go into partnership with people who are also writing grants in response to an RFP to like the National Science Foundation or the U.S. Department of Education, which is a little bit different. And I think your description was primarily for like a large organization that has released an RFP for program evaluation services. I support people who are writing grant proposals, and I would put my section of an evaluation into that. And so they are responding to the RFP. I'm the subcontractor. Is there any difference in the way that some of the advice that you provided in that situation versus the responding to the RFP for an evaluation situation?
Yeah, I think so the evaluation portion adds to the credibility conversation too, right? So if they're subcontracting you out, then the question is that do they just contract you out for the writing of it? Who's going to actually implement? If this organization wins the RFP, who's actually going to implement the evaluation? So there has to be some sort of continuity, and I guess in the organization, what is written in the RFP and the actual implementation of it. So this is similar to the whole hiring a grant writer or hiring an evaluation writer. There has to be a believability that, right, you have an awesome evaluation plan, but can you actually carry it out? Are you going to hire this person who you asked to write the plan to carry it out? And then also it goes the other way in which evaluator understanding what the organization has to bring. So again, we're all be working in evaluations for some time. We understand the importance of relationship building, asking the big questions as to what the organization's goals are. I don't have to repeat too much on that, but just making sure there's a consistent voice between what we're writing and what they're putting out.
And we did have a comment in the chat about, I think it's the psychological piece. And I think this is because a lot of us are one-person shops. So we feel like we're operating in a vacuum. How do you know that you're the right person? How do you have that self-efficacy, that confidence in yourself that you should be responding to this, that you're not in over your head? You may believe in yourself, but are you going up against, somebody who's much more qualified? I mean, to what degree do you kind of trust in your ability or walk away from an opportunity because of perhaps the better understanding for what the client's needs are, or maybe you're not comfortable in your own skin and your ability to meet a need? I mean, how do you judge that?
Yeah, and I mean, love to hear from other people, but I think probably this is a little prioritizing, right? If you're going to take it on an RFP that is going to be one of those big swing RFPs, which is good, I think, because it's just a lot of it's practice, but maybe manage how many of those you take on. Manage if you're going to do one that's kind of a big swing, maybe do another one that's a bit more of a medium swing, so that right, so you're not just completely getting rejected for these large swings that you're making for these organizations. So I think kind of prioritizing what makes sense for you. Definitely go for those big swings. Maybe minimize them to maybe a few for the year, depending on your time commitment. And yeah, nobody's going to believe in you unless you believe in yourself. It sounds cliche-ish, but unfortunately, yeah, the reviewer wants to see that confidence. Of course, supported confidence, but does want to see that confidence.
And I love what you have to say about the big swing. My firm was completely transformed by a big swing proposal that I kept telling everybody, don't worry, we're not going to get funded. And we were, and a lot of great things happened. So I definitely want to get some other people in on this. I know we've got about 15 minutes left in the hour. And so with that, everybody stick around who's here live, but I'm going to say goodbye to everybody on YouTube and come back next week for another session. But everybody stick around. I'm going to stop the recording now.